It's great to see everyone out tonight. My name is Winston Brooks. I am the Community Development Director for the City of Tullahoma, and I work closely with Mary Samaniego, our Senior Planner, who will be right back. And we want to welcome everyone for coming to the Think Tullahoma 2040 Comprehensive Plan public meeting. It's very important to get public input for this plan to be successful. So we really appreciate you being here. With the COVID numbers the way they're going, we want to encourage everyone to social distance, and when you can't social distance, to mask up, especially when we break up into the face-to-face conversations. There's water up here in the front, so please help yourself if you'd like some water. Restrooms are through these doors. I trust everyone here has taken the community survey. Raise your hand if you've taken the survey. I see a few people out there who are missing out. This survey is short, about 8 minutes, and it can be found at tullahomatn.gov. It's at the top of the page. You click, and if you could take that information, that would be great. We've got nearly 800 results right now, and we need more. It also has information for my contact information and other city officials, and it's got the list of all the presentations that we've done in this project, videos. This process also will continue for several months, so if you leave here and you think of something, please reach out to myself or the mayor in an email, and then we will send that to the Walker Collaborative to enter into the record. I want to also big frog shout out to City Schools for letting us use their wonderful facility tonight. We couldn't do that without their partnership. And now I will introduce Phil Walker of the Walker Collaborative, who will take us in from here. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Winston. And thank you for being here. Appreciate it. By the way, you can see we got a pretty small screen. And so it may be kind of hard to see. If you want to get a better view, you might move up closer or whatever, but you don't have to. So let me, first of all, just do some introductions. So I'm Phil Walker. I'm the project manager for the consultant team. And over here to my immediate right is Keith Covington. Keith is an architect, urban designer, and a planner based in Franklin. Next to Keith is Liesl Gothert, who's with KCI Technologies. She's a transportation planner and a Tullahoma native, born and raised, Tullahoma High School graduate. And then Randall Gross behind those two is an economist and strategic planner. And he's based out of Nashville. And you can see well, maybe you can see it depending on your eyesight. But anyway, we've got a steering committee that's a great diverse mixture of different people that bring a lot of different insights and perspectives to the project. And then there are also some advisory members who are staff in different departments. So anyway, that's kind of the folks involved. And so what we're going to do tonight is, first of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview on the project. Just, why are we doing a comprehensive plan? What all is it going to involve? What's sort of the time frame? Then we're all going to give just some initial observations regarding the issues that we're focused on as individual team members and not spend too much time on that. And by the way, how many of you have already attended any of the public meetings related to this project? Okay, so a few of you. I was just curious how familiar some of you were with what we're doing. And then, once we kind of present our initial observations, we'll just open it up. We got a microphone right here, and we'd love to get people's input. What you'd like to see Tullahoma look like, say, in 10 or 20 years. What you want to see stay the same, what might change, that sort of thing. So, and then once the meeting part is over with, we're going to have these little issue stations that we've set up along the back. We've got 4 different topic areas. One is land use and development. Another one is cultural and natural resources. Another one is mobility. And the other one is, what is it? Oh, economic development and housing. So, I'm sorry? Oh, the dots, thank you, almost forgot. So we've also got a map on this other wall in the back It's a dot exercise. And so we've got these little adhesive color-coded dots. We got a map, and there's a legend to it, but it basically says, use the yellow dot to show where you live, use the red dot to show where you work, use the orange dot to show where, do we have orange dots or do we have to use a marker? Well, yeah, we got an orange marker. I can't get orange dots at Staples, apparently. If you live and work in the same place, that's for that. We got another color for where you go to school, if you go to school, and then finally another color for where you play. And play meaning shop, dine, or recreational stuff, whatever. So anyway, if you get time while you're walking around later on, you might want to do the map exercise. So that's kind of the background. So what is a comprehensive plan? Well, it's a roadmap for your community's future growth and development. And the reason it's called a comprehensive plan is because it is comprehensive in nature. It addresses a wide range of issues, everything from land use and development to transportation. Those are two big focuses, but also economic development and housing and the natural environment and cultural resources, utilities and infrastructure, parks and recreation, all those sorts of things. And, any good comprehensive plan should effectively answer 4 key questions. Number 1, where are we now? In other words, what's sort of a snapshot in time of your existing conditions? Number 2, where are we headed? And that would be trends. What direction are you going when it comes to growth and development or your economy, those sorts of things. Number 3, where do you want to go? And that's where the public comes in, because it's all about your vision. This plan that we'll prepare isn't our plan as the consultants. It's the community's plan based on the vision. And number 4, this is where the consultants really come in, is how do you get there? And so that's the details of the plan, taking the vision that the community has and figuring out, how do we get to where we want to be ultimately. So anyway, that's what a comprehensive plan is. So now, why would you prepare a comprehensive plan? First of all, to build consensus. So, particularly the development community, public officials, so everybody's on the same page about Tullahoma. Number 2, the basis for your zoning. One of the main things that will come out of the plan will be what we call a place types map. And 10, 20 years ago, it was just a land use map. Nowadays, we tend to try to think a little more three-dimensionally, not just about land use, but also development, density, and form and character. And so we'll come up with a map that creates that, and then your zoning will likely be revised after our plan, because we'll introduce new types of place types, which would translate into districts. Number 3, to secure funding for projects. So, the city is constantly pursuing grants for various projects, and has had a lot of success in the past, but any time that you can take a project that you're trying to get funded through a grant, and you can tie that to a much broader plan, like a comprehensive plan, you're going to be that much more competitive, because anytime the city applies for grants, they're competing with other communities. So this will make the city that much more competitive when it's going after grant funding. Number 4, to enhance the quality of life. And not only for the current citizens that you have now, but also, when you want to do business and industrial recruitment and get people to do startup businesses here, they're looking for quality of life. They're looking for things like a vibrant downtown and greenways and bike paths and those sorts of things. There's a lot of checklists that people have often, and they're looking for a high quality of life. So it's important for the current citizens, obviously, but also there's an economic development facet to it as well. And then finally, fiscal efficiency, just to make sure that you've got a clear game plan as to where and when you're going to make improvements in town. So it's basically a 5-step process, and we've completed most of task 1, which was the project kickoff and a lot of research that we've jumped into. Number 2, where we are right now, is visioning all these public meetings. This is day 3 of tomorrow will be day 4 of intensive round of meetings. During the daytime, we're having stakeholder group meetings. This is the 3rd of 4 evening meetings at the various elementary schools. Next time and Randy's going to really be digging into his economic analysis work. The next task, task 3, is going to occur in mid-November, and we come back for the charrette. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term charrette, but I kind of describe it as a multi-day intensive brainstorming session that engages the public in a meaningful way to create the key ideas for a plan. So what we'll do that first evening is we'll have a big, try to get as many people as we can to show up. We'll present our findings to date, then break up everybody, all the participants, into teams of maybe 8 to 10 people per team. Each team would be at a table. Each table would have a base map of the city and a set of colored markers, and we walk you through a process where each team can create their own plan for Tullahoma. And, usually that lasts about an hour, and we always hear a lot of creative ideas. Some ideas are viable, not all the ideas are viable, but there's always something we can take out of that. And, each team will present their key ideas at the end of that exercise. And then for the next 4 days, the consultant team works on the concept plan. By now we'll be up to speed on all the existing conditions. We'll have heard in a lot of different ways through the online survey, through all these public meetings, through the charrette workshop, a lot of ideas from the community. So that's where we crank on putting together the concept plan. And on that 5th day, it'll be a Monday evening, we'll present the concept plan to the public. And we'll see what people like, what they don't like, and then we go back and put the plan document together, based in part on the feedback we got from the public. And then we'll submit the draft plan to the city. The city will give us their initial feedback for revisions. And then they'll probably, after we revise it, post it on the city's website so everybody can look at it. And then we'll come back again and present that and get yet another layer of feedback from the community. So you can see it's a bunch of baby steps, it's incremental, but that's how we get to a plan. So with all that background stuff, I'm going to turn it over to Keith, and he's going to talk about his initial observations.
Thank you, Phil. And thank you all for being here. Really great effort that this is, and being able to expand our reach and come into the different areas of the community is really great. So, as Phil said, we're kind of in between that sort of task 1 and task 2. And, we're in this phase where we've collected a lot of data, and then we'll be analyzing that over the next, between now and the charrette when we present those findings. And so I'm going to give you a quick overview of some of the things that we'll be looking at. So from my perspective, obviously the natural features of your community are an important aspect, something that is not only going to define where future growth happens, if it happens at all, but it also starts to identify some of those great assets that you have as a community, the things that make Tullahoma unique. So, for instance, from a topographic standpoint, looking at the lay of the land, you're at the edge of the Highland Rim. I don't know if you can see it on there, but you can see we have these maps, or most of them, over here. So, but you can see that being at the edge of the Highland Rib, at the north part of the community, is where the steeper slopes are, and then of course it's a little bit gentler in the middle, and then you have that big dip where Rock Creek is. And there are various other elements of the topography. So we'll be looking at that and trying to figure out how that might impact future development. We'll also, from a natural feature standpoint, look at your water resources. For instance, not only your water bodies, like Lake Telehoma, Rock Creek, Boca Lake, but probably even equally important is the floodways and floodplains. We've already heard a lot about how Rock Creek floods, and as probably fresh on many of our minds is what happened this past weekend in Waverly in Humphreys County. So looking at those things do impact future development and what you can do in those areas. So that's something that we'll want to consider, as well as wetlands too, which within the city limits are not too bad. They're pretty much associated with those streams and so forth. But just outside of it, in the urban growth boundary and along Arnold Air Force Base and so forth, there are a few more of those areas. From a built environment standpoint, we're going to be looking at land use, and we'll also be looking at your zoning, as Phil already mentioned. And Phil will talk a little bit more about zoning in a minute. You know, this map right here, which is also back there, is your current land uses based on the assessor's records, okay? So what is on the ground now? Zoning is what you can do with your property, okay? And so Phil's going to talk a little bit about that. But, you know, as an outsider, I'm not too far away, but I don't live in Tullahoma. You know, I mean, you know, there are patterns that emerge when we start to look at land use. You know, your commercial areas are really concentrated in the downtown, and particularly along your major corridors like North Jackson. And that is something, that pattern is very much established today. But beyond those corridors, you immediately jump off into mostly single-family neighborhoods, some historic neighborhoods around the downtown, but more newer subdivisions and large lot subdivisions outside of that. So the transition between the two is pretty abrupt in a lot of ways. And, you know, there is definitely a lot of single-family detached development. There's not as much in terms of other housing choices that are there. So that's something else that we want to hear from you about. And then also, you know, if you will see, there's a lot of green on these maps, and those are areas that are either agriculture, as the assessor would assess them, or are rural residential. So that also you have to take into consideration in terms of, you know, what happens to those places in the future. Are they preserved? Are they opportunities for development? And how does that impact looking at things like your urban growth boundary and so forth? So with that, I'll turn it over to Liesl.
All right, thank you so much, Keith. I'm going to talk a little bit about mobility in Tullahoma. So the map behind you is basically the major roads in Tullahoma. These are showing the ones that are functionally classified. What that means basically is it indicates to us how the street should be designed, how the roadway functions. It tells us a lot about traffic volumes and travel patterns. We've already heard a lot, and we know a lot from our data that there is a lot of commuting. You don't really think about commuting in rural areas, but there's certainly a lot of pass-through traffic and a lot of folks coming into Tullahoma and going out of Tullahoma for work. There's about 180 miles of total roadway in Tullahoma, which sounds significant. 70% of those are local streets providing access to subdivisions and individual parcels. 14% of those roadways are collectors. Those gather the traffic from those local streets and carries them to your your larger roadways, your arterials, such as North Jackson. In terms of existing traffic volumes, we do have access to TDOT, the statewide database of not only the roadway inventory, which tells us information about the roadway network, such as sidewalk presence, shoulder width, number of lanes, those types of things, but we also have access to their count stations. And those count stations capture volumes throughout the year, and they go back for several decades, so we can see and evaluate kind of the trends as it relates to traffic volumes. All right, so then we're going to also be thinking about folks that may be walking or bicycling, whether they choose to, or maybe they cannot drive, or they cannot afford a vehicle. So we'll certainly be considering mobility for those using their feet or their mobility device. According to that TDOT inventory, there's about 35 miles of sidewalk in Telehoma. Largely those are concentrated in the downtown, kind of in your older communities, older portion of the community, I should say. And then on the map also, which I'll have on the map in the back, is illustrating locations where there have been bicycle or pedestrian crashes with vehicles. So we also look at those. You can kind of see those are clustered towards your larger roadways, those arterial roadways. So those are things that we're going to be evaluating moving forward. There are also 2 statewide bicycle routes that pass through Telehoma, whether you know it or not. They're the little green signs on the side of the highway you may see, and those provide regional connectivity in a north-south direction and east-west as well. We also will be evaluating the greenway system as well as the proposed greenways. There was a mobility plan done for both Manchester and Tullahoma back in 2019, which had a lot of great input. So we'll be evaluating those proposed connections as well as part of our analysis. Okay, and then utilities. Utilities is very important as an incentive or disincentive for development. So whether or not parcel is on city water or city sewer certainly kind of changes people's views in terms of whether they want to build a home there or not. So we'll also be evaluating those systems too, working with TUA. And then finally, on that note, I should note that Telehoma is pretty unique for a rural community of its size in terms of the local internet provider. It's a 1 gig city, which occurred back in 2013. So Telehoma has been having great broadband access across the town. So that certainly also can influence future development in terms of being attractive to businesses and industries. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Randy.
Thanks, Liesl. I'm the Economic and Strategic Planning Consultant as part of the team, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some initial observations on the local economy, on your economic base. You have about 12,000 jobs here in Tullahoma itself. It's a very diverse economic base. Some of the leading sectors are healthcare and retail, but also professional and technical services, manufacturing, and accommodation services, and that includes restaurants. Some of your major employers, you're probably aware, AEDC is a key driver for your local economy, but there are also other types of businesses, Wisco Envelope, for example, Microcraft, Coca-Cola, Tennessee Apparel, etc., that are very important parts of the economy. Over the last, let's say, 18, 19 years, you've lost some jobs in the city, about 2,500 jobs. Many of those were manufacturing jobs, so that sort of reflects what's been happening nationally in terms of the manufacturing sector. A lot of those jobs have been lost for one reason or another. You have a falling share of what we call the micropolitan area. So you're part of a 3-county region that includes Coffee County, Franklin County, and Moore County. You're sort of the center of that region. But your share of employment and the economic base within that region has been falling over time. You had about 40% of the jobs in that region in 2002. It's fallen to about 35% in 2010, and then about 29% by 2018, which was the latest data that I had available. Not surprisingly, during COVID, in the initial part of the pandemic, your unemployment rate peaked at about 21%, which is very high, back in April of last year, but has since subsided quite a bit since then. Even though you've had some loss of jobs, you've had tremendous growth in certain sectors of the economy. So management services, tourism, healthcare, administrative services, and the public sector have all grown in terms of the employment. The fastest being in management services, about 141% growth since 2002. And then in terms of demographics, you've had some stable growth over the years in population. We have the latest numbers available that just came out in the last few weeks. In terms of population, you have gone above 20,000 in population. So an increase, I think it's about 9.6% over the last 10 years, so close to about 1% per year in population growth. And then you've also had substantial income growth since the last recession. And so the growth in income, households, and population help to feed into your economic base and into the market for various goods and services in the area. And we'll go on from there into zoning.
Thanks, Randy. So Keith was talking earlier about existing land uses. There's a map that looked kind of like this because there's a correlation, but as Keith pointed out, existing land use is sort of a fact and an existing condition thing versus public policy, which your zoning is. And the last your zoning ordinance was written in 2009, and it's had updates over the years. But you've got a fairly limited number of different zoning districts. So you've got 3 different commercial districts. The C1, which is that kind of mustard color, is concentrated in your downtown. It's focused on downtown type commercial uses and development forms. The C2, which is the red that you see going along Jackson and out Carroll and some of these other streets, that's kind of a highway commercial type zoning. And there aren't many examples of it, but there is the availability to have neighborhood commercial, so small scale commercial that can fit into a residential area. There are two different industrial zones, kind of a light versus a heavy industrial. There are four different categories of residential zoning. The lowest density, which is like minimum 12,000 square foot lots, is the R1. And that's all that stuff that's kind of pale and, you know, I realize the color's different on the screen than my screen here. So anyway, it's kind of like a light green on there, but it's probably the most extensive zoning you have geographically. And then there's other density levels that go up higher till you get to R4, which allows for things like multifamily. And then the dark green, and it is dark green here, is agricultural, and that tends to be kind of peripheral, particularly on the north part of town. And there's a little area in the very northeast for open space residential, where you have residential lots but a fair amount of open space. And then there's the airport impact overlay, which is a series of kind of concentric ovals that are over where obviously around the airport. And that just kind of regulates, you know, the height of buildings in those areas, that sort of thing. When it comes to historic resources, now even though this slide says historic zoning, right now you don't have any historic zoning in an active way. And let me explain about that. First of all, let me back up. You know, a lot of you probably heard of National Register historic districts, and those are kind of honorary. They're federally designated. They do come with financial incentives for historic rehab of buildings. There can be some tax credits, but they don't have any sort of regulatory protections for older buildings. You do have on the books, you've actually got a historic preservation ordinance that sets up a preservation commission and, you know, historic zoning, that is, you know, local level designation, would actually regulate demolition of buildings and alterations to existing historic buildings and new infill development, you know, how that would fit in. But there haven't actually been, even though it's on paper in an ordinance, there haven't been any actual districts designated. Although this map shows some that have been considered in the past, and of course they're all grouped around the downtown area. But that's something that we'll look at in this plan as to whether you should maybe consider moving forward, particularly if you have sufficient property owner support for that. One other thing before I get to the Q&A, another issue we didn't, this kind of popped up before we, or after we put all this presentation together, but we're also going to look at climate change as an issue. That's something that some folks have been talking about and feel is important, and it's not unusual, particularly these days, for citywide comprehensive plans to address climate change. You know, we all kind of believe in what they call smart growth, which has been around for 20 or 30 years, which has sort of an environmental friendly underpinning to it. But it also is important to kind of look directly head on at, you know, climate change and what the impacts might be and how to mitigate that. So that's something that we'll look at as well. So with that background, I guess we can open it up for Q&A. So I don't know if anybody has questions or comments, or if you want to share your vision for Tullahoma in 10 or 20 years, anything like that, but anything, you may have questions or just something you want to convey to us. Thank you.
My question is related to the information that he gave, the information concerning the population increase and the job increase. What year are those statistics coming from? Did it stop at 2019, or did it include 2020, which was impacted by COVID?
Those were long-term numbers, so they were from 2002 to 2018, which was the latest the census data had available.
Okay.
So they did not include the pandemic.
Did not include the pandemic, so we don't know what state we're actually in right
We do have some, we do have some state data. It's just not I didn't look at that over the long
No,
term. but we did
not
have-
state, like statement, I mean status, like where we're at statistically as far as where are our jobs now, where are our population numbers now? Has it been impacted substantially by COVID, or trying to get that information for income purposes?
Right. Well, the population data was just released from the census for 2020. So that would be through April and maybe a little bit longer from 2020.
Okay.
Those are the latest actual numbers.
Okay.
Now, the census will release estimates of 2021 in a few months, probably early next year.
Okay.
So we'll have updated information on 2021. But the data I presented, or that I talked about, was for 2020, so that's, you've just reached the 20,000 mark in
Okay.
terms of population, so it's continued to increase.
Increase, okay, but is that like a 1 point something rate? It's increasing?
It seems to be, the rate of increase in population seems to be accelerating a little bit in the last couple of years.
Okay.
I'm just looking at the numbers, it seems to have grown a little bit faster in the last few years, yeah.
Okay, so the next question is, will we have access to these slides so that we can I can go back and review numbers and develop more questions?
Yeah, I think they're available online and on the website, correct?
As far as, hey, Winston, our PowerPoint, it'll be on the city's website, right? This is a part of that website where all the information on there, basically, videos are listed. You can put it on the web.
And then there'll be, and so now I'm doing a lot more detailed analysis
Okay.
as part of more of the economic development strategy and the housing element of the plan.
Right.
And so there'll be a lot more detailed data, and if you come back to us around November,
Okay.
there'll be a charrette, as Phil mentioned, and we'll have a lot more of that more detailed information and data in terms of projections, the current numbers and the projections going forward.
Okay, because I have a business here, I don't live here, so
Right.
I'm interested in how the economy is doing.
Ah, very good.
And so that I know that the area can support the business and I can actually provide employment and do those types of things.
Great.
So I need to know like the growth rate and what areas are actually prospering outside of just North Jackson where all your typical commercial things are.
Right. So there'll be more of that data in November.
Okay.
So we'll be able to talk about some of the growth projections, what areas will be growing and how and that sort of thing. So we'll have more of that information.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, thank you. Next, yes, please.
I'm Gary Kidd. I live at 401 Heights Avenue, just right across the street there. I've been Telehoma resident for 53 years. And my question is the land use policies and the city development overall. What provisions are made for solid waste? Because when Telehoma was first founded, we took all the trash and we dumped it right off the hill off of Lauderdale Street, right behind the Farm Bureau office. We quit doing that when the hill got built up. Then we went out on 55 towards Motlow and dumped it there at the city landfill. Then we filled that up. Then we went out here on 55 to Manchester where the Air Force Base let the county use a landfill. Then we filled that up. Now we take our trash and truck it to Middle Point in Murfreesboro. It's going to fill up, or Joe Carr's going to quit letting us ship it up there. And then we're going to either send it to Ray County or somewhere else. And I'm not one of these people that says not in my backyard. I would like Telehoma's waste to stay in Telehoma. Couple reasons for that. I don't want to dump on somebody else. And I think it would put pressure on the city to increase its recycling, to develop more avenues for recycling, and maybe to have some internal processes to use that recycling to make products and stuff. And I would like to see us be a leader in disposing of as little trash as we can and really, really increasing the recycling. There's only 2 households on my street that recycle at all. Everybody else just buys 2 trash cans. And we really need to make that expensive, and we need to focus on keeping that trash here. And I would like to make sure the comprehensive plan does something, because putting that trash on diesel trucks and hauling it to Middle Point or to Ray County, like New York, they put theirs on a trash train and take it to Alabama. That's not very green. Burning all that fossil fuel to haul trash somewhere else and dump it because people don't have a say is poor practice in my thing. I put out more recycling yesterday than I did trash. But I understand the recycling doesn't have a profitability in a lot of avenues now. And I'd like the comprehensive plan to be, hey, Telehoma come up with that solution. And we don't ship the trash out to someone else's backyard.
Yeah, unfortunately, our plan isn't going to address solid waste management, as in where do you dump the stuff. That's kind of its own science and would be a separate study. However, based on our discussions with the city, if we think we need to address recycling and at least talk about the merits of it and how that might be done, that's something that could be addressed within the scope of this project. But figuring out sort of like where you dump it and all that, and we're not experts on, that takes all sorts of probably soil scientists and things like that. So I apologize that it doesn't address that, but we could address recycling at least in a general way. So thank you for sharing that concern. Anybody else? Yep.
Yeah, I got a question. My name is Jeff Vance, Tullahoma resident. Also, I went to high school here. We teach at a graduate. My question is, you put up the slide dealing with manufacturing and how a lot of manufacturing is leaving Tullahoma. That's a lot of jobs that's leaving this city. Do we have any kind of plan to bring some manufacturing in? Are we going to start working with the building trades, get some programs in a high school that's going to train up our kids? Because majority of people that leave and go off to school, they don't come back to Telehoma because there's really nothing to come back to. What are we going to put in place as far as getting jobs back into this city that's actually going to have somewhere for our children to actually work and be it management or whatever? We need something here for our children to come back to.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, Randy's going to be working on an economic development strategy for the community. And of course, a big part of that is job creation, right? We don't have a plan yet because we're still early into the project, but he'll be doing a lot of research and analysis. I think you're going to do like an economic visioning type exercise with some economic development professionals. We've already met with some so far. And so, yeah, that's a really important issue for this plan. We don't have the answers yet, but we will by the time the plan's put together. So thank you.
I'm glad you talked about climate change because back in 2006, Al Gore came out with a documentary on global warming due to carbon dioxide emissions, and that was 15 years ago. And within that time, the average temperature of the Earth has increased by another ½ degree centigrade. So if we were to take measures right now to decrease our carbon footprint, by 2050, the Earth will have warmed up another 1.5 degrees. But hopefully the temperatures will be stable by that point. If we do nothing, the possibility of runaway temperature rise is a possibility, along with the extinction of mankind. I'm hoping things would have been different, but I don't think there's going to be political will to make any big changes. And I'm hoping that your report will have some ideas for Tullahoma to survive the next 100 years.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we are going to have a section in the plan specifically about climate change, and there's some great resources out there. I was talking the other night about a policy document that the American Planning Association put together just a couple of years ago on how to address that issue within the broader context of a comprehensive plan. So there are definitely things that we can propose. Now, what it's going to boil down to, though, I mean, there are a lot of ideas you can put out there. It's going to boil down to what's going to be supportable by the public. So, we'll certainly push the envelope on that issue. So thank you. Appreciate it. Anybody else?
I recently opened my store here, so I got introduced to the codes and regulations process rather abruptly. But to my understanding, some things have changed, and now there are some new procedures and new policies and new things that have to be implemented when you purchase a property. Is there a plan to make that transition of getting everything up to code smoother and maybe easier for small businesses? I'm not a large corporation, so I don't have the unlimited resources to just bring everything up. So is there a plan or a strategy for making that a little simpler and easier for small businesses, especially for the events or the things that are high-ticket items? If there can be a grace period introduced, but the business can still open to generate income to actually perform these duties versus being shut down and not being able to generate income to meet the standard. So is that something, are the codes going to be revisited, or is there a strategy or some way to implement a grace period or something in there?
So what we'll be doing is we'll have a section on public policies and making recommendations. Like, for example, we're not rewriting the zoning ordinance, but we can make general recommendations on things that should be changed. We can also look at the approval process for, development and business openings, that sort of thing. From what we've heard, and a lot of people have shared this with us, that within roughly the last year or so, things have improved pretty dramatically in that regard, particularly just having more clarity on requirements and having more consistency on how requirements are applied. So that's great news, but we'll definitely look at the whole process because the city wants to make it as user-friendly as it can for people, but there are minimum requirements that you need to meet. Now, I've never heard of a situation where you can actually start a business, and hope to get some kind of approvals, meet certain standards, after the fact. So I don't know that anything like that's available, but we will look at the process and see if there's anything we can figure out how to either streamline or whatever, and we'll look at that. Yes?
Let me just give you a quick example. So we purchased a building that functioned as a business with a gravel parking lot. So in order to open, I had to have it concreted. So if it was able to function up until that time that I purchased it with a gravel parking lot, it would have been great if I could have still opened and generated income before having the parking lot open or poured. So those are the types of things, small things, but high-ticket items for a small business, especially if the existing structure was a functioning structure before. I could see if it was abandoned or something like that, but if it was a functioning structure, could it not still function and then bring up within a 6-month period or something like that to the new standard?
Yeah, to be honest, I've not heard of it being done that way. If you have to do, have asphalt pavement, for example, in a parking lot, that typically has to happen before the business opens. However, you brought up a really interesting topic, and that is that, we try to figure out, this term green infrastructure means finding ways to deal with stormwater runoff and so forth in a way that's not just piping it and, with all the oils and runoff to go to some system where it's dumped, but to figure out how can you have a more natural way of stormwater to filter into the soil and all that. So there are all sorts of things like brick pavers and gravel. In some cases, you can, for a small parking lot that gets minimal use, there are cases where you could have something like gravel. And if not, there are other more environmentally friendly approaches than just typical asphalt. So anyway, we'll look at that. Randy?
I think on that last bit, I think what Phil's saying is that we'll look at some of those requirements. I agree with what he was saying, that you probably couldn't require people to do something and then allow them to get away with it until they have the money to do it. But, maybe the requirement to begin with could be changed. Or there may be a package of incentives for smaller businesses that allow for certain things, other types of opportunities. So we'll look into those.
Yeah, and that's was kind of my point, that that there may be different ways to do it. In other words, you might have to follow the requirement before you open, but maybe the requirement changes. So, yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jessica Fogarty, and as a former school board member, I think I have like maybe 2 weeks left. I did kind of want to point out that the gentleman's concern about the having manufacturing and jobs back in here and about training the students or students are about to graduate. It is a focus of the school system to start incorporating more CTE programs, and I know the governor has also had a big push on it as well, and so it's something that's really on everyone's mind, and I know that it's actually a goal of the school system right now to really beef up that CTE and even to kind of see that kind of infiltrating, more aspects. So I just wanted to kind of give some hope on that. I think that's okay for me to say. And then my second part is just another little piece of hope, and it's about the gentleman about the recycling, because I want to say I think that's great that you recycle, because I do as well. And I think when I first moved here to Tullahoma, I've been here about 14 years, I will say, I don't know if it started when I first got here, but I take a lot of pride in the fact that our city does have recycling. So I want to give a big kudos to that. My sister-in-law who lives like in Chattanooga or Ottawa or whatever, she's like, oh no, I have to pay for it, and I'm not going to do that, So I feel like our city's already doing a really good job of providing that service. And to that gentleman's point, I think the only part that probably gets frustrating is that more people don't capitalize on it. But my own mother-in-law goes through about 100 trash bags because she just doesn't, get with the program. But I think a big part of it is there could be potential, and hopefully you guys will be able to figure this out, for a way to incentivize it in such a manner that, if you do two trash cans, then you have to pay quite a bit more, There's got to be some sort of scenario to kind of really push that recycling envelope, because our city is so generous to work through that with us. So just thought I'd offer that up.
Quick question. So right now, do you and we'll dig into this obviously, but it's not a topic I've researched yet. So do you have recycling cans and you put recycling in it and
So the city will provide them, yes. We just happen to, because we recycle so much, like the gentleman said, I probably recycle more than I actually put in my trash can. So I have to go, I got a big, for the plastics, I got a huge thing. And then for the cardboard, it just thrills my mother to break down all the cardboard and get it stuffed into one cardboard box. It's like literally a passion for her. So she just does that. But yes, the city will provide them. Best of my knowledge, city guys, if I'm wrong, let me know. But I think they definitely provide them. And like I said, I think just working towards encouraging it. They have tried in the past. I also want to be clear about that. I think there have been programs or like awareness raised for that. And I think that's great. I think really you kind of have to maybe attack it from a different angle and say, okay, now we're actually going to say that it's going to cost more to actually dump the trash. So just a thought.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, one of the keys on recycling is to make it easy for people. If it's not easy, you're not going to do it. I mean, for glass, in Nashville, they pick up other things but glass. So I have to store it in these bins, and every week or so, depending on how much beer I drink and how much football's going on, I have to go and I got to dump it, But yeah, thank you.
I'm Joseph Jernigan, just a regular person, housing, live in Telehoma. Two items, I don't have questions on them, more or less. I thought this was kind of like a suggestion, looking forward for 2040. To go along with this gentleman's argument on the, school infrastructure from a manufacturing standpoint. I'm in the manufacturing field. I've seen in other communities, they have this maker space or village workshops or something like this, and they usually get a big group of equipment and then put it in a larger facility in like a kind of more or less a manufacturing or a, what do you want to call that, industrial park area, and then they bring the students, normally high school students, they use TCAT and all these other groups and suggestions to help fund this and pay for the equipment, along with anyone that's likes to build things or make things as well can pay a monthly fee and go in there and use that equipment as well, and then learn, and they can teach other people skill sets that they normally wouldn't be able to do, like for example welding or
CNC, you put microcraft up there, that's something somebody might want to go and pursue that job, but they don't have the skill set, didn't learn, but yet they would go out and, spend month to month to learn that, and then maybe be able to get a job in that field. That's the first item I have, and then the second item I was saying, or was thinking about was to start small businesses. I saw this also in a different community. They set up, basically it's just a shipping container, small one, and it gets small businesses out in the open area and usually the town square setting, and then they let them stay in this area, basically rent free, bring your own stuff, you fill it up, and then you get your spotlight time frame out in a more trafficked area than you would normally on one of these side streets that wouldn't normally get as much attention, and then it would build like businesses like this woman was talking behind us, get them off the first initial stages of it, first year or two, and then continuing on. And that's all I got.
Yeah, that's great. That's more than enough. Those are great ideas, and I see we're taking down notes. And yeah, that's sort of the shipping container idea is sort of like a small business incubator almost. I mean, not like one big facility, but like a series of small ones. And yeah, so we'll look at models like that. Same thing with the trade, vocational trade program. That sounds really interesting. So we'll follow up and learn more about that. And that's the kind of thing Randy will be looking at with his economic development work. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Michelle Johnson. I actually am a THS native. Lisa and I played soccer together. But I've moved back to town. My husband and I both own a remodeling company, and I have a background in MSW and MDiv. The only reason I say that is because I'm curious what of this, is there any potential for a focus about social issues? So things like drug use and abuse, crime and violent crime, treatment options for folks, things like bus access to the school system, issues of diversity, access to government aid, some of these more social components. Is there any thought that there might be a focus on those things?
So we don't plan to have, it's not in our scope to have a section just on like social issues. However, it's amazing how intertwined those are with things like housing, economic development, education. So usually we end up touching on it at some level, depending on what the issue is in the community and what the level of need and all that. So we will be addressing it. It won't be a certain section just on that, but it's so intertwined, like I said, with other issues. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Well, it looks like we might have worn people out, so we're gonna go back here to these little issue stations, and feel free to just wander around, ask us questions, give us your thoughts. We've got the map back there for the dot exercise showing like where you live and work and or recreate or things like that. And thank you again for being here. We're going to do another one of these, the fourth and final tomorrow night. And what school does anybody know? I'm sorry? Bel Air, yeah. So if you didn't get enough, which I'm sure you did, but again, thank you, and try to follow along on the project, and take the survey if you haven't done that yet. So thanks again.